I want you to do something for a second. Wherever you are, just take a look at your own arm.
Just, yeah, glance at your forearm or the back of your hand.
Right. Because most of the time, we look at our skin and we just think of it as a biological wrapper.
Like a passive waterproof casing.
Exactly. Just this thing that exists to hold all of our internal parts together, you know?
It feels like the canvas for our tattoos, or, I mean, the thing that gets sunburned, the outer boundary.
Yeah.
It feels entirely passive, honestly, almost like a piece of clothing we just happen to be wearing.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the underlying biology of what you are looking at right now is actually a highly engineered, aggressively active thermal interface.
Oh, absolutely.
Your skin is constantly making these life or death mathematical calculations about blood flow and heat exchange.
It really is a marvel of biological engineering. And, well, our mission for today's deep dive is to explore this process. It's called cutaneous thermoregulation.
Which is basically the scientific way of describing how the human body cools and warms itself, right?
Spot on, because human beings have to defend this incredibly narrow, survivable core temperature. I mean, we are talking about keeping the internal organs and the brain between 36.5 and 37.5 degrees Celsius.
Which is roughly, what, 97.7 to 99.5 degrees Fahrenheit? That is a tiny window.
A remarkably small margin for error, especially when you consider, the massive swings in environmental temperature we expose ourselves to.
Oh, sure. Going from a blizzard to a heated room.
Right. Not to mention the immense amount of metabolic heat our own bodies generate just by, well, moving around.
Yeah, just existing generates heat.
Exactly. So we're going to explore how we manage this feat, clear up some major misconceptions about sweating and body heat, and look at why understanding the system is rapidly becoming a literal matter of survival in our modern warming world.
I think the most natural assumption we all make is that our skin actually controls our temperature.
Sure, it makes sense.
Like, when you walk outside on a freezing day, your skin is what feels cold. When you step into a sauna, your skin is what feels hot. So naturally, we assume the skin is in charge of the whole operation.
It is a completely intuitive assumption, and historically, even the greatest medical minds operated on that exact premise.
Wait, really?
Oh, yeah. If we look back at ancient humoral medicine, they thought that warmth and cold were actual, literal properties of bodily fluids.
Humoral medicine, that's the four humor stuff, right?
Yep. They believed these hot and cold fluids were simply distributed by the skin and the blood vessels, viewing the skin as the central seat of heat regulation itself.
That's wild. Like, hot and cold juice is just sloshing around inside a leather pouch.
Pretty much. And that passive view of the body held sway for centuries. It wasn't until the 19th century that this started to change.
Okay, so who figured it out?
A French physiologist named Claude Bernard. In the 1850s and 60s, Bernard introduced this revolutionary concept called the milieu intérieur, the internal environment.
This is a paradigm shift, wasn't it? Because before Bernard, people essentially thought we reacted to temperature like inanimate objects.
Exactly, like you put a rock in the sun, it gets hot.
Right, you put a rock in the snow, it gets cold. We were thought to be at the total mercy of the ambient air.
But Bernard rejected the idea that complex organisms are thermally passive. He realized that the body actively stabilizes its internal environment regardless of what's happening outside.
Which is homeostasis.
Yes. That insight became the seed for homeostasis, which was a term coined later in 1926 by Walter Bradford Cannon. Cannon cataloged all these feedback mechanisms the body uses to keep things stable.
So when it came to temperature, the skin's role had to be completely redefined.
Exactly. The skin, it turns out, is not the thermostat.
The distinction between roles here is really fascinating. So the skin is a sensor.
A highly sensitive one, yeah.
It contains thermoreceptors, millions of microscopic nerve endings that detect warmth and cold, and they report that raw data up to the central nervous system.
And beyond being a sensor, the skin is also an effector. It is the organ that executes the commands.
Meaning it does the actual work of cooling or warming.
Right. It flushes with blood to dump heat, or it clamps down to conserve heat, but crucially, it doesn't decide anything.
So if I'm picturing the architecture of this system, the skin is like the HVAC vents in your ceiling, and maybe the little temperature sensors wired into the individual rooms.
That's a great way to look at it.
But the hypothalamus specifically, this cluster of neurons called the preoptic anterior region inside the brain, that is the actual smart thermostat on the living room wall.
Yes.
That's the mechanism making all the decisions about what normal actually is.
Building on that analogy, the hypothalamus sets the target temperature. receives the real-time data from the skin's sensors, and then tells the skin's vents and pipes how to react to maintain equilibrium.
Which must have been incredibly hard to prove back then.
Oh, proving that communication loop took decades. Working out how those skin sensors translate a physical temperature into an electrical nerve signal drove experimental physiology all the way through the 20th century.
Just mapping the wires, basically.
Exactly. In the 1950s through the 70s, researchers like Carl Hensel were performing incredibly delicate electrophysiological recordings from single cold and warm nerve fibers in the skin.
Just to see how the signal gets to the brain.
Just to map out that pathway, yeah.
Well, if the hypothalamus is the brains of the operation issuing the command to cool down or warm up, how does the skin actually physically execute that order?
It all comes down to manipulating 4 fundamental channels of physical heat exchange.
Okay, what are they?
You have radiation, which is simply losing infrared heat to cooler surroundings.
Which happens constantly.
Oh yeah, radiation actually accounts for over half of your resting heat loss in a normal room. Then you have conduction, which is direct heat transfer to a surface you are physically touching.
Like sitting on a cold metal bench.
Exactly. Third is convection, which is heat carried away by moving air or water flowing over the skin, like a breeze. And finally, evaporation.
The fastest tool the body has to control those first 3 channels is our internal plumbing, right? The vascular system.
Specifically, a process called vasomotor control. Your skin arterioles, those are the small blood vessels. They're wrapped in a network of sympathetic noradrenergic nerve fibers.
And what do those nerves do?
When they're active, they constrict the vessels. This vasoconstriction literally shunts warm blood away from the surface of your skin to trap the heat deep inside your core.
Oh, so that mechanism is the direct reason why your hands get pale and icy cold when you're out in the winter air.
Precisely. The body is pulling the warmth inward to protect the organs.
And the reverse process happens when we need to dump heat. The brain withdraws that constriction signal, and an active vasodilator system kicks in to open those blood vessels incredibly wide.
They open up, and this brings all that hot core blood rushing right up to the surface so it can radiate away.
The thing that really stopped me in my tracks when looking at this was the sheer scale of this biological response.
It's massive.
Right. At rest, sitting in a comfortable room, the blood flow to your skin is maybe a few hundred milliliters per minute. But under severe heat stress,
It's crazy.
that flow can skyrocket up to several liters per minute.
It is a massive diversion of cardiac output. Your heart has to work incredibly hard to pump liters of blood away from your central organs and push it all the way out to the periphery.
Wait, if liters of blood are being actively diverted to my skin to cool me down, is that stealing blood away from my muscles?
Yes.
Like if I'm out for a run on a 95-degree day.
You've hit on a crucial physiological conflict. The skin and the working muscles end up directly competing for the exact same limited blood supply.
Wow, so you're literally fighting yourself.
You are. This competition is a central reason why heat stress severely degrades athletic performance. You literally cannot deliver as much oxygen to your leg muscles because your cardiovascular system is prioritizing sending that blood to the skin.
Just to keep your brain and organs from cooking.
Exactly. It's also why extreme heat is so incredibly dangerous for people with heart disease.
Oh, because of the strain.
Yeah, their compromised cardiovascular system simply cannot handle the immense mechanical strain of pumping those extra liters of blood to the surface.
That makes total sense. Now, there is a very specialized part of this vascular plumbing system designed specifically for this task, called arteriovenous anastomoses, or AVAs for short.
Yes, the AVAs.
These are only found in glabrous skin, which is the medical term for hairless skin. So we are talking about your palms, the soles of your feet, your lips, your ears, and your nose.
The ADAs are brilliant little structures. Think of them as direct high-flow shunts.
Like a bypass lane.
Exactly. They bypass the tiny high-resistance capillary beds entirely and connect small arteries directly to veins. They act almost like mechanical floodgates.
Okay, so how do they behave in the heat?
When you are overheated, these AVAs open wide, instantly turning your fingertips and your ears into major biological radiators.
And when you are freezing, those floodgates snap shut to trap the heat inside.
Right.
Which perfectly explains why your nose and ears are always the very first things to go completely numb in the cold. But they're also the first things to flush bright pink when you've been sitting by a fire.
The body is selectively deploying its external radiators based on the immediate survival need.
Moving blood to the surface is an elegant first step. But when the ambient air is too hot, Just radiating heat isn't going to lower the core temperature.
No, it's not enough.
When radiation fails, the body deploys its absolute ultimate weapon, phase change.
Evaporative cooling.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we fundamentally misunderstand how this everyday biological function works.
They really do.
Let's talk about sweat. We have 2 to 4 million eccrine sweat glands distributed all over our bodies.
Right, and these secrete a watery fluid, which is functionally distinct from the apocrine glands in the armpits that produce the thicker scent-based secretions.
There is a massive public misconception here that I was totally guilty of believing. The pervasive myth is simply sweating cools you down,
From a purely physics standpoint, that statement is false.
which is mind-blowing.
It is. The physical presence of liquid sweat sitting on your skin does absolutely nothing to cool you. It is the evaporation of that sweat, the physical phase change from a liquid to a vapor, that actually pulls the heat out of your body.
The mechanics of it are fascinating. Breaking the hydrogen bonds to turn that liquid water into a gas requires energy, and it pulls that energy in the form of heat directly from your skin.
It's remarkably efficient.
It removes roughly 0.58 kilocalories of heat for every single gram of sweat that evaporates, which means, and I feel somewhat betrayed by this when I'm at the gym and I'm just dripping with sweat, leaving literal puddles on the floor, I always thought that meant I was getting a massive, highly efficient cooling response.
Yeah, that's what everyone thinks.
But sweat that just drips off you provides absolutely zero cooling benefit.
None whatsoever. If it drips off your chin, or if you wipe it away with a towel before it has the chance to turn into vapor, you have lost the water volume and the electrolytes, but you have received essentially none of the intended thermal relief.
That is so frustrating.
A dripping body is a body whose primary cooling mechanism is currently failing to keep up with the heat generation.
Wow. Okay, since we are actively dismantling thermal myths, we have to look at the classic head radiator myth.
Oh, this is a classic.
Everyone has heard their mother or grandmother say this. You lose most of your body heat through your head, so put a winter hat on.
It is one of the most remarkably persistent medical myths in modern culture, and its origin traces back to a highly flawed mid-20th century U.S. military study.
The military did this.
Yeah, researchers were attempting to measure heat loss in extreme Arctic conditions.
And they dressed the test subjects in these heavy, incredibly insulated, cold-weather survival suits that covered their entire bodies.
But they didn't give them hats.
But no hats.
Unsurprisingly, when they measured where the heat was escaping, a massively disproportionate amount came from the head, simply because it was the only part of the body exposed to the freezing air.
That is such a glaring design flaw.
And the resulting data was misinterpreted for decades. Physiological reality dictates that heat loss is roughly proportional to the surface area exposed.
So your head doesn't possess some magical, high-density radiator status?
Not at all. If you wore a heavy winter balaclava but left your legs completely bare in the snow, you'd lose the vast majority of your heat through your legs.
It's amazing how a simple experimental design flaw became conventional wisdom for generations.
Right.
Now, while this thermoregulatory system is undeniably brilliant, examining what happens when it is pushed to its absolute physical limits really reveals its vulnerabilities.
Let's look at elite endurance athletes.
Yeah, let's talk about them.
Highly trained, heat-acclimatized athletes provide a prime window into the system operating at its maximum theoretical capacity.
How much sweat are we talking about?
In hot, strenuous conditions, an elite athlete can lose an astonishing 2 to 3 liters of sweat per hour.
Per hour. That's unbelievable.
That is a massive volume of fluid being systematically pulled from the blood plasma and pushed through those millions of tiny glands. It's why marathon runners and triathletes have to plan their fluid replacement with the precision of a medical procedure.
Because when that system is overwhelmed, the results are catastrophic. Exertional heat stroke is a leading cause of sudden death in sports.
It's incredibly dangerous.
You see this tragically in football training camps. The death of NFL lineman Corey Stringer in 2001 is a perfect example of what happens when the evaporative and vasodilatory systems are completely overpowered by metabolic heat and environmental conditions.
Yeah, that single incident fundamentally revolutionized how sports programs mandate rest breaks and manage hydration.
Because once the core temperature spirals, the organs begin to fail rapidly.
They do. And we see equally extreme triage measures on the cold side. Think of mountaineers at high altitudes.
Right, the frostbite side of things.
We talked about those AVA floodgates in the fingers and toes acting as radiators.
When extreme cold threatens the core temperature, the hypothalamus makes a brutal, highly calculated survival decision, doesn't it?
It clamps down those AVAs so tightly to keep the warm blood centralized in the core that the tissue in the extremities is literally starved of circulation and begins to freeze.
That's terrifying.
The central nervous system will permanently sacrifice the fingers, toes, and nose to frostbite in order to keep the heart and the brain functioning.
It's a biological trolley problem. The body decides the hands are expendable if it means saving the vital organs.
It's grim, but it's effective.
These extremes aren't just reserved for athletes and mountaineers, though. There are unique differences in how the system functions based on basic geometry, which explains why certain populations are so devastatingly vulnerable.
Oh, you mean children?
Yeah, pediatric vehicular heat stroke children accidentally left in hot cars is a clear example of this.
Children face a significant geometric disadvantage. They have a much higher surface area to mass ratio than adults.
Meaning they have a lot of skin compared to their body weight.
Exactly. This means they absorb heat from the surrounding environment much faster relative to their small internal body volume.
And their system isn't fully developed either, right?
Combine that rapid absorption with a thermoregulatory system that hasn't fully matured yet, meaning they don't have the same sweating capacity or vascular reserves that adults do, and a closed car interior can overwhelm their defenses in a shockingly short span of time.
That surface area problem must be even worse for infants. Plus, a newborn doesn't even have the ability to shiver.
No, they don't.
Like, if you or I get cold, our muscles rapidly contract to generate friction and heat, but babies lack that muscular coordination.
What's fascinating here is how evolution solved this exact vulnerability. Human infants lose heat incredibly rapidly, so they are equipped with an entirely different physiological mechanism.
This blew my mind when I read it.
It's called non-shivering thermogenesis, and it relies on a highly specialized depot of fat called brown adipose tissue, commonly known as brown fat.
Brown fat is concentrated heavily around an infant's neck, shoulders, and spine, right?
Yeah, mostly around the upper torso. What makes brown fat so uniquely special is the behavior of its mitochondria. They contain a specific protein called UCP1, or uncoupling protein 1.
Okay, what does that do?
In a normal cell, mitochondria burn cellular fuel to create ATP, which is the primary energy molecule used for movement and normal cellular functions. But UCP1 uncouples that metabolic process.
Wait, so it's like putting a car in neutral and just stomping on the gas pedal.
I love that analogy.
We're burning through the fuel and the engine is creating a ton of heat, but the wheels aren't actually moving.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. The mitochondria burn the metabolic fuel and release the energy purely as thermal heat without doing any mechanical cellular work.
So it's basically a space heater.
It is a dedicated chemical furnace designed specifically to keep the infant's core warm until their nervous system matures enough to coordinate shivering.
A purely chemical heating system. It's incredible. We've explored the extremes: heat stroke, frostbite, babies, athletes.
We've covered a lot.
But understanding how all of this actually applies to our daily lives requires looking at how that smart thermostat in the hypothalamus is actually calibrated.
Right, the set point.
We naturally tend to think of a set point as one rigid target, like a single line drawn in the sand at 98.6 degrees. But it's actually an inner threshold zone.
It's a range. There's a small band of core temperatures where the body is perfectly content.
So it's not freaking out at 98.7.
No, as long as your internal temperature wanders around inside this neutral zone, no active cooling or warming responses are triggered. Furthermore, the threshold temperature that triggers sweating is somewhat independent from the threshold that triggers shivering.
Understanding that inner threshold zone completely flips how we understand getting sick. A lot of people think a fever is a malfunction.
Like the cooling system broke down.
Exactly, like the body is overheating out of control. But wait, if a fever isn't the body breaking down, how does the hypothalamus know to raise the temperature? Is the infection somehow hacking the thermostat?
So, hyperthermia, like heat stroke, is an unregulated rise in temperature from a failed system. A fever, however, is a deliberate, highly regulated upward resetting of the hypothalamic set point.
It's doing it on purpose.
When you are fighting an infection, immune signaling molecules called pyrogens travel through the bloodstream to the hypothalamus and basically rewrite the code. They turn the dial up.
The body now actively wants to be at 102 degrees.
It defends that new higher target just as fiercely as it previously defended 98.6.
Is this why you get chills?
Yes. This underlying mechanism is exactly why you feel freezing cold and start violently shivering when a fever is first coming on.
Because your thermostat was just moved up to 102, but your body is still at 98.
Exactly. Your body thinks it is suddenly hypothermic relative to the new, higher set point the pyrogens just established. And clinical evidence suggests this moderate, elevated temperature actually optimizes and supports immune function.
Which means suppressing a moderate fever immediately with medication might actually be fighting your own body's deliberate, evolved defense strategy.
It's definitely something researchers are looking closely at.
So what does this all mean for humanity today, in a world where extreme heat events are becoming the daily norm?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it means we have to understand exactly where our biological engineering breaks down. Look at the devastating 2003 European heat wave, which resulted in tens of thousands of excess deaths, concentrated heavily among the elderly.
Why were the elderly so disproportionately affected?
Because as we age, our thermoregulatory reserve naturally diminishes.
The system just gets weaker.
The aging body blunts the vasodilator response, so the heart can't pump as much blood to the skin, and the output of the sweat glands significantly decreases.
So they can't bring the heat to the surface, and they can't sweat it away.
Older adults lose the ability to fully open their two primary cooling channels precisely when they need them the most. It wasn't just severe heat exposure, it was a structural failure of the body's internal engineering to keep up with the environment.
This brings us right back to evaporation being the absolute hero of the story, because it explains why public health officials and meteorologists panic over high humidity.
Humidity is the enemy of this system.
A dry, 100-degree Fahrenheit day in the desert is hot, certainly, but a humid 90-degree day in a tropical or swampy climate is vastly more dangerous.
It all comes down to vapor pressure. When the surrounding air is already heavily saturated with moisture, which is what high humidity is, the sweat sitting on your skin simply cannot evaporate.
Because the air is already full of water.
Exactly. The physical phase change from liquid to gas is blocked by the sheer amount of moisture already suspended in the air.
Which means your primary cooling engine is completely disabled. Your heart is pumping liters of blood to your skin. Your millions of eccrine glands are pushing out massive volumes of sweat. But because that sweat cannot turn into vapor, no heat is removed.
You are just dripping liquid and rapidly heating up.
It's why meteorological measurements like the wet bulb temperature, which strictly factors in humidity, are so incredibly crucial for issuing heat index warnings.
The humid environment effectively cuts the brakes on your body's temperature regulation.
We have covered an immense amount of biological ground today. We learned that the skin isn't a passive wrapper or a thermostat. It's a brilliant effector organ taking complex orders from the brain.
Yes.
We learned that evaporation is the true engine of cooling. Dripping sweat is essentially useless, and our bodies are constantly making brutal vascular calculations, sometimes literally sacrificing our extremities to save our core organs.
The human body is truly a masterpiece of thermal engineering.
It really is. And I want to leave you with one final lingering thought. There's a fascinating molecular biology detail regarding those temperature sensors in your skin, specifically two receptor proteins called TRPM8 and TRPV1.
I love this part.
TRPM8 fires an electrical signal to the brain when it detects cool temperatures. TRPV1 fires when it detects dangerous burning heat.
Which raises an important and rather fun question about the things we eat.
Think about the last time you popped a peppermint candy in your mouth and took a deep breath. It felt icy cold, didn't it? Why does that happen if the candy's just sitting at room temperature?
Because of the chemical structure of menthol. Menthol, the active compound in peppermint, chemically binds to and artificially activates the TRPM8 cool receptor in your tissue.
And the exact same biological hack happens in reverse when you eat a jalapeno pepper. It feels like your mouth is physically burning, but the pepper isn't hot.
Capsaicin, the active chemical in spicy peppers, perfectly binds to the TRPV1 heat receptor.
When you eat minty or spicy foods, you are quite literally chemically hacking the exact same thermal sensors in your tissue that we just spent this entire deep dive talking about. Your brain receives a definitive signal that says freezing or burning, and it completely believes it. So next time you look at the skin on your arm, don't just see a passive wrapper. See the millions of microscopic sensors, the miles of vascular plumbing, and the phase change evaporative cooling engine that is quietly, aggressively keeping you alive right now.